Well, we have made it. Here we are at the closing session of the 2024 The Ed Collab Gathering. Today has been so inspiring. I have enjoyed every session that I was able to listen into. And the good news is, if you wish you could have been in multiple places all at the same time, you kind of can, because the whole day is archived and will be up on our YouTube channel for as long as YouTube is a thing. It will be there for you to come back and watch these sessions. So if you caught one, wish you could have seen the other at the same time, please do, because they all have been absolutely phenomenal today. Before I bring on Amira and we move to our closing, just a few things. Number one, a big thank you to all of our presenters today, to Lorena, Roberto, Tawanda, Nita, Andrea, Georgina, M. Garcia, Tracy, Amy, Katie, and soon Amira. Thank you for making this day so incredibly powerful. Also, a huge and eternally grateful thank you to the tech team co-leaders, Abby and Jessica. Without them, this day wouldn't be possible. They have been with us. Jessica's been here since the very beginning. Abby's been here for several seasons of the gathering, and they are two full-time educators that also fit into their day. The ability to prepare and support presenters and to help get the site and social media, everything up and running. I couldn't do this day without you. Thank you both so very much. Also, special thanks to members of the Ed Collab who were here today as chat moderators. Thank you for helping to keep the community safe and everyone engaged and excited in all that we were doing inside of the chat and our learning this afternoon. A reminder that if you found today powerful at any point, please do pay the joy forward. The Ed Collab Gathering has always been free. You can attend just by clicking a button and joining. All of the sessions are there for you to watch whenever you'd like. And so you don't have to fly to a conference. You aren't trying to grab a quick lunch at the deli across the street from the convention center. You're watching perhaps in your pajamas or on your couch. If that's you and you feel inspired today, please take what you would have paid for registration or perhaps for a flight or even just for a cup of coffee and consider paying that joy forward. Go to gathering.theedcollab.com/charity, and there you can learn about both charities and you can choose to donate to them. Every little bit counts, and it really helps to support nonprofits in doing the work that they do. In all of our sessions today, we've invited you, and once again, we'll invite you wherever you're watching this from, to come over to YouTube. YouTube is the best place to join in this closing session because we are going to be having a live chat, a guided chat in the kind of like Edu Twitter chat version that we used to have. Amira and I will be guiding you through numbered questions, and you can add your numbered answers inside of the chat. You can chat from Facebook and Instagram, other places we are too, but if you come over to YouTube, you can see what others are talking about as well. So we invite you to go to the event website, gathering.theedcollab.com, scroll down to our session, click view on YouTube, and then you can watch live there. We will be guiding you through a chat, but we invite you to please chat whatever you'd like, as everyone has been doing all day. You can respond to one another, not just to us. Please use that as a place to connect. We started today talking about the theme, which is around hope, and just wanted to acknowledge one more time that while fear can get in the way of hope, it really is action, even small steps, that can break down those fears that we might have. And this was inspired by our summer book club book, This Book Won't Burn, by Samira Ahmed. Inside of it, Noor Khan, a high school senior, is faced as she moves mid-year to a new district. She's faced with book challenges. And we see through the eyes of this character, Noor, how you can take small steps that grow and grow and grow until it's not a book that's burning. It really is the energy for change that's being fueled and engulfing everyone around you into really taking action. So without further ado, let me click off my slides here. I'd like to welcome my colleague at the Ed Collab, Amira Abdel-Aal. So happy to have you here as we lead today's chat. So first, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be here. So grateful to have attended the live sessions. I missed that. I think we're all missing that sense of community. So we appreciate it, Chris, for leading it, and for our web people, for the moderators, for making that happen too, because we've, even though we're still virtual, it feels like we're together.
Agreed. It felt like a different kind of energy today than our mostly pre-recorded ones, which
Yeah.
we had to do by necessity post-pandemic. But it just felt so special to be live and have that energy. So what are we doing this afternoon? So this afternoon is called Action Steps, Teaching for Hope, an interactive chat. And in this chat, we mostly would love to hear from you. So Amira and I will talk together as we post questions, but we're really interested to hear your own thoughts as well. So we're going to guide you through a series of preset questions. We debated if we should post those ahead of time or not, and we think it might feel more natural for them to come out as we go and maybe help you process your thinking. I'll also say before we jump into it, there were some of the ways that Roberto and Lorena broke down questions this morning. Did you feel that too? There's some where I was like, oh, we're in
I was like,
sync.
as if we were like on the same page.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, that's our question too.
Yes, we had not planned it specifically, but I was like, oh, yes, good.
Yeah.
That's how we're processing too. We must be on the right track.
Yeah.
So here's how the chat will run. Amira, do you want to talk us through how we should respond?
Yeah, so today we're hoping that it could definitely be interactive with everyone on the chat. We're going to pose 6 questions, 1 question at a time. And as you'd like to respond, if you can try your best to just write the number to the question that you're responding to, just so that we can make sure that, that's what you're referring to. And we'll go from there and see how that goes.
All right, so I think I'm yeah, we said earlier, I'm odd, you're even. So I'll get us started.
Aren't we all?
So, yes. So here is our question 1. When you respond in the chat, please put a number 1 in front of it, and then you can respond. Amira and I will talk a bit off of each question, wherever our conversation goes, and then we also would love to pull in some of your responses as well too. And you don't just have to respond to us, you can respond to each other in the chat as well. So question number 1. Today's theme was hope is a verb. What are you hoping for? And I'll kick off, and then Amira, I'll invite you in too. So I actually had said this during the morning. There's many things I'm hoping for, but taking Lorena's advice of like, pick a thing, make that your thing. You can have other things too, but pick a thing. So as I said this morning, I'm wearing Rise Up for LGBTQ plus youth. This is a shirt from GLSEN, the organization that supports queer youth and looks at their interactions in schools. I'd say for me, that's one of the things I'm hopeful for. I just was attending Katie and Amy's session on using queer books with young children, and I feel so hopeful to just hear and see the ways that elementary educators like Katie are talking about queer identity and supporting their kids and talking. And really the point came up in that group of how it's more the adults than the kids that are struggling with what to say. It's not an issue for the kids as much as it can be for us. So I think with question 1 for me, I would say I'm hoping for many things, but one of the things is that school and then beyond school community is safe for all kids inside of their gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is, for them to be them.
Yeah, definitely. And a note that it reminded me of right now when you said that, I feel like a lot of the problems and issues that we're dealing with today are caused by adults, not by kids. So the kids are the ones who are dealing with it. So personally for me, my hope, what I'm hoping for is recently being out of the classroom and more into consulting, is that I want to find and reconnect with that sense of community, to find fellow educators, to be able to connect with one another. Because I think the reality is that when we choose to become educators, we are choosing to be action driven. We are choosing to, find to have that verb piece in the concept of hope. We are I think so finding that network and finding that community and the resources again is what I'm hoping for. And it's the main source of that starting from the Ed Collab, which I'm so appreciative of.
And I see in the chat, here's one. Tawanda has, I'm hopeful that educators are ready to have conversations about data that is not disconnected to students' humanity. And I love that from their openings or their session earlier today as well, too. Another, Cindy, I'm hoping to learn more about Goldie Muhammad's work that is not compliance driven, but centered around identity, building skills, creativity, joy, which centers kids. I love that.
And a takeaway too, sorry, Chris, I was just going to mention from the Dr. Tawanda's session, I also remember they were talking about how using assessment where you're finding the purpose of that assessment, it's rooted in that assessment. And so it'll be interesting too to discover ways of how different types of data can be understood better to find the purpose of why that's being collected and how that's being collected.
Kathleen, I'm hoping for more joy and well-being in our schools and for pedagogy. Yes, we want joy. Janet, I'm hope that more schools become places of happy learning. Feels like a lot of what we're talking about is that like humanity, having people feel safe and okay, having more joy in schools. Should we move ahead to question 2?
Yeah, let's do it. What does this hope, that like the examples that were mentioned, what does this hope mean for your role in education? So as we think of ourselves, we mentioned that I just mentioned as, I think once you decide to become an educator, I think that's an automatic next step, is that you want to be action oriented. It's not just hope is not something passive. It's something that we actively pursue every single day in the classroom. And it could look differently. And I think also it is a place where we are trying to get to know ourselves as educators. I think that the work also has to be done for the self. And the deeper we know ourselves as educators, I think that will heavily influence our role in education too, towards our students and our communities and fellow, colleagues.
I love that, thinking about our own exploration of us and what's our role, what's our voice, what can we do, what do we actually believe in. Thinking back to the sessions today, like to Katie and Amy's just earlier, Katie had this, I thought, really powerful suggestion where she said, we can, or she said that she has next to her phone, and she encouraged her colleagues to do it too, a list of her like beliefs and even phrases that she wants to say. So if someone were to call and challenge, why are you having queer characters in this, but why is there a trans character in this book? In a time where she's calm and prepared, she can list out this is what I believe and this is why I'm doing it. And I thought that was so powerful, that when you're in the midst of a stressful phone call, it's kind of hard to know what to say. So there she thought specifically about, what's my role? What do I hope for? I'm just going to prepare ahead of time so it's there. Some of the responses, number 2, my role as a classroom teacher and teacher leader is to pay forward our new teaching, from Jessica. From Kathleen, here she is, that we have to ground ourselves in our practices in humanity, well-being, safety, and joy. We have to reconnect. I think for me, in thinking about there's many things I hope for, but let's think about queer representation. I think my role as a visiting teacher, when I consult with schools, I have safety where I'm not an employee of a district. I'm oftentimes not covered by the laws of that particular state. I'm mindful of what's going on in the place I'm in. I don't want to, quote unquote, stir up problems, but at the same time, I try to hold in myself the strength, and it's a challenge at times, but to share stories and to say the word gay and to be able to not feel internalized homophobia when I have the luxury of not being an employee. So I can share stories and help to give people a place to use their voice, or for us to connect over using voices. So I think about my role in that way.
And I think too, we talked about this, I feel like the more space that is created, whether it's among colleagues or among students, that's where the safety happens. That's where the feeling of trust is built, feeling open to share each individual's feelings, ask the questions that maybe, you know, kids might be uncomfortable to ask, but I think the more we create that space and include our own personal experiences and our own honest experiences in that space for the kids and for the students and for our colleagues, that I think that they'll be also more open to share and be, you know, develop that trust and that sense of shared community and safe space.
Did you want to talk a bit off of some of the resources that we were talking about?
Yeah. And just really, I also wanted to point out to Janet here also said, as an instructional coach, I need to model how learning can be joyful and help the teachers feel hope and joy in teaching. Sophie also mentioned this hope means that I need to continue to push for using data in a more humanizing way. Definitely need to go back to watch Dr. Tawanda's session. And Cindy, I think this hope means that educators come together in community to push back and advocate for more student-centered classrooms versus transactional babysitting. Wow. Yeah, so I think also I'm noticing a common theme of this idea. I keep seeing the word humanizing and joy, and it's just like, it's going back to the root of what education should mean, what our spaces should feel like. And going to, you know, for example, on this slide right here that's posted, this is a social media connection that somebody I follow on Instagram, just even personally, but May's storybook account, she is very intentional in sharing picture books, for example, for a slew of issues, right? For everyday things, internet global issues. Here, just the screenshot I took that was to honor immigrant experiences. And I think when we create, again, it's about the space, right? If we create more opportunities for kids to access resources that where they can see themselves in these books, then this opens up the chance for conversation, which I think is going back to this openness and trust approach where they can feel that sense of hope when they experience that.
And because we had talked about May's storybook, and also because I also follow her on Instagram, this morning as I was swiping a bit, I saw that she had a recent post sharing the stories that were written by and feature Haitian people, given some of the racist stereotyping that has been happening politically recently. And I said, Freedom Soup, I have that book, when she held it up too, by Tommy Charles. And I love Freedom Soup, for example, how it's a story that I and my schooling did not know of the Haitian Revolution and what that meant for the people and their strength there. And so I really appreciate Janet saying too, I love what May does. I love May's account. And I loved going like, oh yeah, I have that book. Like there's a way where she shares new books, but she also reminds you of the resources you might already have and how important that is to use them.
And I think it's also a reminder for us, right, that we all, you know, we think about picture books as that's access for all ages, for those really young kids all the way through adults. And I think having that as a resource in our spaces is really beneficial to open up that conversation and create that space too. Maybe we need to invite her to the Ed-Collab.
Yes, well, now that you said, I was like, we have to invite May. We have to invite Tammy. There's so many good people. Yes, good call. Noted. All right, question 3. I love, by the way, Tawanda, I loved earlier, you were like, it makes my educator heart tick to be numbering answers like we used to do on Twitter. So here's question 3 for you, Tawanda. So this is something that feels really important in any kind of work that you are processing is that we can run in with hope. Here's the things I want to change, the things I want to do differently. And we as educators, I want to have impact around. Um, but we should be proactive into what could get in the way. So what might get in the way of this thing or these things that you're hoping for? What barriers could exist? And naming those can help you think more carefully and also be ready for them. I'm sorry to go back to it again, but it was literally a session just before this, and it felt like they were answering our questions. But Amy and Katie talked about, Amy made the suggestion, make sure you tell your administrators what's going on in your classroom, and to tell them, while you would disagree with it and you hope it doesn't happen, they should be prepared in case there's community feedback that goes against having queer books, for example. And so having that awareness of a barrier ahead of time allows you to be proactive and plan. So if we think about what might get in the way of some of the topics we're bringing up, so clearly for my topic, book challenges and book bans are certainly a barrier. Laws in some states are a barrier. But I think one I wanted to highlight more specifically for a moment here is not the external barriers, but also what can be happening inside of us. So when it comes to queer representation and picture books and queer stories, if you were alive in previous decades, you have internalized queer phobia because we were taught that. School taught us that. Society taught us that. And so one of our barriers can sometimes be ourselves. I'm a queer person that has internalized queer phobia. So there are times where I'm not sure what I can talk about, or is it okay, or will this be seen as wrong? Or I might even like fidget a little bit if I want to talk about a trans character, for example. So I think there are certainly external barriers that can exist. But I think as adults who have been alive for many decades, we also have our own internal barrier that sometimes, I would actually say oftentimes, doesn't match the reality of the real threat that's actually there. It is more of a threat to a child that's contemplating suicide about their identity than it is for you to feel a little bit uncomfortable because a parent might call you upset, if that makes sense, right? Like it is more of a threat that laws are being passed in states with the threat of federal laws that could make it impossible for trans people to have access to being fully who they want to be. It's more of a threat to their body than it is for you to feel like a colleague might not like you because you said something they don't like. Who cares? I don't want to be so crass that I get that there's, interpolitics in schools, but I think one of those barriers is oftentimes us.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was like, I wasn't sure if it would be too critical of our own selves, but I think that's exactly what needs to happen. I think going back to what I mentioned before is the understanding of the self more deeply. And because I think once we're more deeply connected with ourselves, we'll start to notice the subtleties in the words that we use. And even though it might not be intentional, even though we're trying to, get rid of our own personal biases that we have, or things that we have had to internalize from our past, or past trauma, or past childhood, or past upbringing, I think the more we know ourselves more deeply, we'll start to be more aware of that, like the nuances in how we communicate, or what we choose to teach, or how we choose to teach it. And I think that the practice of expanding our knowledge will help that. And thus the questions that we ask our students, or the questions that we ask our colleagues and the teachers or the schools that we go to, will also be expansive, will also expand and be more expansive. And I think, we need to be very conscious of that as educators in what we're bringing. And I also wanted to mention too, hope makes people feel like they matter. And so I think, as you said, like, even though we may be nervous about consequences, or we're dealing with kids who are, as you said, contemplating their livelihood. And I think this concept of bringing back hope in an intentional way reminds them that they matter. So perhaps we need to weigh that, right? And think what are ways we can break our own internal barriers to ensure that we're providing that for the kids.
I love that from the morning session with Lorena and Roberta, where they were saying, like, we enact hope. Like, that's what we are doing with our kids. And I love their even short examples of, like, I hope to see you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I hope to see you at the game tonight. I
Mm-hmm.
hope you enjoy this. Like, even just saying the word
Mm-hmm.
hope, making it a part of the work that we do, and just recognizing that that's part of building that hope as well.
Mm-hmm.
A few comments here. I really appreciate you being so transparent, Janet, because I agree. I admit that sometimes I'm very judgmental about the teachers I work with. I wonder about why they have chosen to teach when they seem miserable, and their students do too. And I think in response to this question 3, I'm reading that as both like a barrier is the teachers, like what are they doing? I wonder if a barrier is also ourselves too, of like, because I can also be, I'm generally an affable person, but I can be judgmental of people too. Could that be a barrier that I'm putting in the way of myself? Like, you really are making me think, Janet, like there are people who I strongly disagree with the things they might think. If I just completely shut them out and make no effort to try to talk to them, then I will always live over here and you will always live over there, and the two never will meet. Should we move ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to share too. Here we have Cindy to kind of what we were talking about, overcoming bias, right? Or prejudicial thinking is a huge barrier. How do we overcome that when facts and information doesn't necessarily lead to new thinking? Yeah, I think that's where we're internalizing our role too, and creating, using resources and opportunities for that to be challenged.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Amira. Of like, I'm reading into this. Part of it is the like, how do we overcome other people's biases? But I love that you keep bringing this back up of like, it also is us too. Even the things that we think we're open about, I realize I'm not always as open about, or I have to learn more about, or I even have to understand the nuances of experiences that aren't my own, or issues that aren't necessarily my own. And I think the more I am educated and understanding myself, the more nuanced my response to other people can be too. So if something comes up, the more I know and I've learned and internalized and understood my own belief system, the better I can talk about it to others as well. Janet, yes, judging is a barrier. Yes, I
And then they
fall
have
into
the
that
solution,
too.
right? They have the solution too, like, which I agree with. Like, I think, as Sophie is saying, I think stories and connections are the most powerful change makers. And I think that's what we're going to circle back to, right? Like having those connections, using different stories to be shared.
That, yeah, here again, her next comment, facts and info don't always touch the heart.
Yep.
I mean, truly, when I think about, why am I forgetting the name of it? The FX show, I can't remember, Pose. So when shows like Pose or even Will and Grace, when stories are shared on TV, it's a safe way to interact with, for an audience, with people they may not know or interact with in their real lives, in the same way that books are a safe place to interact. So Sophie, I love you highlighting that facts and info are important, but yeah, probably the door in are stories. And Cindy, you're saying the same, like StoryCorps is a great example of that like coming together. Love those points. For time, we should continue to move ahead.
So what could you do in relation to these barriers? So I think that was a perfect segue, right? Finding those stories, finding the connections, creating that space where more of that is shared, I think is a great way to do that. And if I could go to the next slide over to share some of these resources. So actually, sorry, I have to do another plug-in for the Ed Collab, because the gatherings, folks, are so helpful and so beneficial that I remember attending the fall gathering of 2023, which you can access on YouTube in the Educator Collaborative space. And I had not known about this organization. It is I Am Your Neighbor. And essentially, It is an organization that focuses on the genre of welcoming literature. And the idea of welcoming literature is it has curated resources and books that create community conversations on immigration, that build community belonging with books, and that raise the next generation to welcome. So it's about these immigrant stories. It's about, second, third generation families, and they can either, I'll encourage all of you to look further into the services that are offered, but they can have a library come to, they have a selection of books come that's paired with like discussion questions come to your school, and you can either purchase it, you can borrow the books, like there's all these sorts of options. And I love how there's an organization was created for this specific resource, for this specific purpose of sharing the stories of that include more of us, right? For the students to see themselves too. And in that session, Sarah, I don't want to butcher their names, but Sarah Norsworthy and Kirsten Cappy mention this idea of books as, we hear books as mirrors, books as windows, right? But it's also books as museums or books as art galleries. And it's this concept of also being able to expand our knowledge and learn about people's stories through a very well curated collection of books. In addition, one of the ways of fighting these barriers that we're facing is the Brooklyn Public Library Books Unbanned. And this is the concept of teachers during once books were starting to be banned, education is a form of resistance, right? And so teachers chose to, for example, post up these QR codes to allow that accessibility for students to be able to access banned books. And I think these are two great resources to use.
And so a reminder of question number 4, what could you do in relation to these barriers? And so some of those resources were both, you could create those things. So you could create a van that goes and brings books about immigrant experience, for example, and share those in communities. But you also can connect to the folks who are already doing that work as well, too. So we invite you to take a moment to think about one of these hopes that you have. It could be one that you've been talking about so far, or maybe there's another that's come up for you. And for answer number 4, what could you do in relation to these barriers? So if I think aloud for mine, so one of the barriers is our own internal work. So it's certainly, well, I guess I started to answer it a little bit. I think consuming stories. So like watching the series Pose, for example, while it clearly isn't every trans person's experience, it gave me a view into the 80s, 90s trans experience in New York. And I learned a lot through the show, not just through the direct issues they were talking about, but just the facts of life and daily living helped me understand more. Then I suppose in terms of the barriers of, like, to side with Janet's thinking before, like, of people that might frustrate us. Oh, that's a harder barrier. I don't know. I think I try very hard to continue to try to make change, like, or make connection, I should say. I try to like go part way to like folks that sometimes bother me, but I don't know. I need advice. I need advice from the chat too of what to do.
Cindy is saying having a thought partner to do this work with helps me move past the judgment.
And I get that's very helpful. Thank you, Cindy. And I think I like the idea of thought partner, even with the barriers. If I like, maybe you're thinking, I don't know how I would deal with the laws or the policy in my school or whatever it is. Thought partners might just be the answer. All right. Should we move to question 5?
Let's do it.
So question 5. So we'd like you to take an emotional read of yourself. And this came up, I think Roberto brought this up in the morning session. Take an emotional read of yourself. How do you feel thinking about the actions that you want to take after today's gathering? what are things that you are fearing, or what are things that you feel energized about. And it feels important that you think about both of those, and both of them are equally okay. It is very human to be fearful or feel anxious about some kind of change that you're working towards. Um, it's also important to not get trapped in that anxiety, and also to think about, but what are the good outcomes, or what are the things I'm excited about? And then the reverse is also true. You might be so excited about something you want to grow or change inside of your school or your classroom. Acknowledge and be okay with, there might be things that make you fearful. It doesn't make you a bad person to say, like, so with my topic, yeah, I'm sometimes nervous and worried about how I'm going to talk about queer experience through books. I'm worried about if I can even bring it up. And that's okay. The more that we can acknowledge how we're feeling, and this question is really about that. It's not about solutions yet. It really is just, how are you feeling in relation to these hopes you want to have.
Yeah, and I think finding your people too, like as we continue to say, we have to create a safe space. I think we need to create that for ourselves. And hear somebody saying connecting with friends who have also stepped out of the classrooms and schools and learned about how they're able to still feel connected and able to keep a real pulse. Like I think that shift is hard too, feeling outside of it. Um, and I think the more we talk, I think that's something that we've learned from the Gen Zers, I guess, is that with social media too, is that they're vocal. They have this level of, confidence where they talk about what they're feeling, and we're starting to name things more, and we're not keeping it. There's less shame around it. That would help me, is talking more with others.
I really appreciate you bringing up our Gen Z friends and colleagues. And one reason why I appreciate that so much is, I also think that gives me hope, because that means the schooling that generation had, and now the Gen Alpha is having, though things feel in some ways, like Lorena had said this morning, like 1950s, or like, what are we in right now? In some ways where things can feel we've gone back.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we look at what current generations, how they're talking, what they're
Yeah.
comfortable saying,
Mm-hmm.
the agency that they feel when they push back,
Mm-hmm.
that happened because of the education and social environment that all of us who are here on this chat, and all of you watching, have been some part in creating. So I really appreciate you pointing that out, because it makes me think, okay, things aren't all horrible as they can sometimes feel that way.
Sorry, I have to say, that's such a good point, in that I feel like the world seems to have gone so far back and so dark, yet at the same time you have this concurrently you have the Gen Zers and hopefully the Gen Alphas and whatever comes next, right? Like they're actually surprisingly vocal. Like we saw with the, for example, the campus encampments. Like there's this thing that we used to kind of judge them on, the level of entitlement, but actually it's a positive force, as them being
Yes.
agents of change and having that, like, confidence to be like, no, we're speaking up about something that we care about or that we see that is wrong. And so it's
Yes.
really like, it's interesting to see the dichotomy of how the world is and how the youth movement, I guess, is pushing back on that.
Yes. I love your point of, like, it's a thing that we can kind of be like, oh, look at you. But
Mhm.
truly, it's a strength. I mean, I even think, like, when you hear in the job market, and some like
Mhm.
business leaders or managers that'll say, like, oh, this, like, whoever generation, they
Mhm.
just want, I mean, this was even happening. Managers would talk about millennials this way of,
Mhm.
like, oh, they want their own space. They want this, they want the things. It's not, maybe it's a little entitlement, but I don't think, to your point, I don't think it's entitlement.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
it's recognizing things are unfair and not
Mhm.
okay, and
Mhm.
that I can have a voice, that I don't
Mhm.
have to just follow in line. I can speak
Mhm.
up to things too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yes, I love this thinking. One, or was it Janet? I have to try to remember that it's not usual to be fearful. And I
Mhm.
think about an acquaintance I have whose job was to organize against international terrorism, and that my fears, that fears don't seem too unimaginable. That's such a great point, to think there's a lot of people doing a lot of things. What's the thing I can do? What's my role inside of it?
Mm-hmm. And here's, it also feels really weird to be focused on my needs right now rather than on kids. Feels uncomfy. And I'm noticing that I'm feeling self-conscious about it. Yeah.
I appreciate in that Sophie saying like, I feel self-conscious about it. Cause I think there's power in naming too. Like when you're able to say, I feel, what's the thing I feel? Oh, it's self-consciousness. When you can say that, I feel self-conscious, that can allow you then to do thinking around it. Well, is it worth me being self-conscious? What specifically am I worried about? So that naming and being vulnerable with that naming to yourself, and in this case to others, is really helpful.
Definitely.
So as we're coming into towards the end of our session here, should we move on to final question?
The last question. Action takes community. This is hard work. Where can you find connection and support? Collective power goes to real change. Sophie mentioning that. Yes. Oh my gosh. Together, right? Better together. That includes students, families, community, colleagues. I think it's important to remember that when, as Sophie's saying, when we speak up, we also need to think about organizing and working together. So as much as we want to have that community, action is required. And I'm going here to 2 examples. Like, I love the session sharing the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival and all the different opportunities that are being offered through that festival. I have to mention here the Ed Collab, and just having that sense of community where we can lean on each other and get ideas. And when we talk about, for example, barriers, we're not alone in this, and you're not alone in this. And I'm sure that there are others who would appreciate a back and forth conversation to turn either like these feelings of hope or uncertainty. I'm sorry, the feeling, of hope, to turn the hope into action, but also the fears and uncertainty into action is really helpful. And here Cindy's saying, leaning into the kids and families I serve to be my community. This will help me learn and grow. And there are just, if we look beyond the school building for support and community, I think a lot of people are going through the same thing, as long as we reach out to each other and be there for each other.
I love, Tawanda, first, I love how she phrased it. You have the permission to, I feel like we have to give ourselves permission. But that's such a good point. It's not, if where you are, you don't feel like you have the connections that you need, you can look beyond where you are. And all of the things that feel overwhelming and not so great about the internet, there also are a lot of things that make it a great point of connection as well too. And so I really appreciate that point. And Janet, the Ed Collab has been great for me, but it's been great having you here too. There are some other organizations as well. Being able to connect virtually has helped, even though I love connecting in person. Very much agreed. So I think to Sophie's point of collective power, real change. I love the idea. I think at first when we were, Amira and I were posing these questions, I was thinking of this more as like, where can I go to get the things that I need? Where can I get support and help and growth? But I love, in my mind, this conversation is also having me frame this in the other direction of, so how can I join in community or form community that can help create the change that I want, that can help me move forward? And whether that is large systemic changes or even things I want to do differently in my own classroom, and then I can connect with community that helps to grow that too. So I appreciate all of those points.
And actually, I was thinking of something right now about how I know, in my mind, I was thinking of building community as finding the people. And that's not always easy or the case, or that might take certain effort. But I think we should also go back to kind of what we mentioned before about finding the community within like literacy resources. So finding that sense of community through other books. So for example, when I was in the classroom, is being able to, bring in books where the kids can see themselves, or they can have that sense of belonging through books, and as educators have kind of like a launch pad for a conversation to be had by using books as a resource to build that sense of community. I think we shouldn't forget that.
I love that. And it's also feels like multiple entry points that,
Yeah.
because sometimes that's a barrier in and of itself to like, I know this community group exists, but I feel too nervous to do I just call them up and say, what do I do? And so having text as another way in feels really supportive. So I think we're getting to the end of our time here. So first, Amira, I'll go to you for any closing thoughts.
No, thank you. This was so very much needed, just in the sense of this concept of hope. And I think the humanizing aspect of every session that was a part of the Ed Collab was needed. I do think we are in a dark space in our world, and I think a lot, as we're all feeling that, we have that common feeling of wanting to find humanity, wanting to find joy, and I think that's going to be the thread that maintains that sense of hope for us, and is a driving force for us as we pay that forward, hopefully.
Agreed. I love how this chat started with hope, what's an action you want to take, but really that feels like one of the big things we've come to but it's about people. It's about the connections we make. It's about the way we look inside of ourselves and the way that we connect with others too. So thank you so much, Amira, for joining us this afternoon. And thanks to all of you who are joining us in the chat as well. We started out this morning framing the day, hope is a verb, talking about how hope takes action and how the things that we want to see in our world, in our communities, in our districts, in our schools, and in our classrooms takes real steps. And so just a few parting thoughts. One action that you can absolutely take if you are in the US is to make sure you are election ready. So you can go to vote.gov. A link is also on the Gathering website. And there you can check your voter registration. Also, if you have any youth in your lives that have recently gone off to college, you can check on the voter registration inside of their states as well too, and various laws around that. Laws are also changing very rapidly, even just this week in different states. So please make sure that you're clear that you are registered, the people you love are registered, and you have everything you need to vote fairly and accurately on the day of the election. A big thanks to Roberto and Lorena from the Multicultural Classroom who kicked off our day this morning, and to all of the presenters that joined us. And then last but not least, if today was inspiring to you, please do pay the joy forward. Truly, even the cup of coffee you would have bought in the morning, every little bit helps a nonprofit to do the important work that they're already doing. So please, please, please do go over to that link, learn more about these organizations, and pay the joy forward in whatever way you're comfortable. Every bit helps. So thanks to all of you for joining the 22nd The Ed Collab Gathering. We will be back with the 23rd The Ed Collab Gathering in spring 2025. It happens every September, every April, every year. So if you aren't already, please make sure you follow us on social media at the Ed Collab. You can also sign up for a newsletter at our website, and there you'll get updates for the spring gathering. If you are interested in earning clock hours, I should make sure I put that back up as well too. If you are interested in earning clock hours, you can do that. Oops. There it is. You can do that by going to theedcollab.com/clock hours. If you attended today, or if you didn't attend the whole day and you want to watch the recordings, if you attend for 4 sessions, then you can earn 4 clock hours and you can learn more there at the website. So thanks everyone for everything that you do to make hope a verb. We look forward to seeing you in April at our spring gathering. And as always, thanks for all you do for your colleagues, for your students, and for our amazing profession. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care.